The first thing to accept about the environment is that it is no longer just the environment. The long run is here. We talk about environment as an afterthought, and that's how all policies are being made for the last God knows how many decades and centuries. But it's no longer a luxury to think about the environment, it's actually a survival imperative. A couple of years back, I was in Bihar and there was a big flood, and Nitish Kumar had gone for a helicopter survey, and he comes back after the flood survey and he says, "Sukha zyada serious hai." So people asked him, "What are you saying? You went to look at the flood, then you came out with a drought, you know." So he said, "नहीं, वो तो सारा सूखा पड़ा है, नदी में बाढ़ है और बाकी सारा सूखा है." Now, can anyone solve this puzzle? It's very, very simple. The cause is the same. The cause is climate change. The climate change is causing the drought, and the climate change is leading to the glacial melt, which is causing the rivers to be in spate. So the rivers can flood and the monsoons can fail at the same time, and that's how you have the situation. Last year, when you had the Uttarakhand floods, the glacial lake melted, the Glof phenomena, and that led to the whole Kedarnath, Gaurikund Valley, flooding out of control. And it happened so suddenly that it took everybody by surprise. So things are happening behind us. We are just looking ahead of us, and we are thinking about economic policy. But some almighty is making our environmental policy rather actively behind our backs, and we're not paying attention. We cannot relegate certain questions to the long run. They have to be brought in right now. Okay, so this is my starting point, and this will also be my conclusion. And this government, like every previous government, is fated for complete failure if it does not integrate economic and environmental policy. Very few governments in the world are thinking of doing that, let alone actually doing it. Some places in Latin America have made a pioneering start, but certainly no Western country is doing it, and not Japan, and so on. Now, moving from there, just to give you some sense of how bad things are, last year, Parthadas Gupta issued some data from Cambridge University, which showed that since the 1970s, India has been on an unsustainable growth path. Unsustainable just in the sense of actually not being able to cater to the resources needed for economic growth, let alone human survival in the long run. But just to keep the growth process going, it's not sustainable. World Bank, a year ago, World Bank is not going to lie about something like this. World Bank a year ago came out with a very important report, which was actually there in the media for a brief while and then not discussed at all, which showed that just looking at a few indicators, such as loss of forests, loss of water resources, etc., not looking at 20 or 30 different environmental indicators, just looking at, say, about 8 or 10, you still have something like 5.7% of your GDP being lost every year, right? Because of environmental losses. Last year, the growth of the economy was 4.5%, so actually the economy grew negatively at minus 0.1.2%. So if you did green accounting, you would realize that the economy has stopped growing for a long time now. Shall we have a development principle that BRIC nations and developing nations advocate aggressively, as we have been doing so morally around the world, and say that, let's say the number of cars in the world are 2 billion, and that's the right number, and India has 20 million cars, that's just 1%, that's how many? 1 out of 100, 1% of the world's cars. India has 16% of the world's population. Should India also have 16% of the world's cars? Is that a good principle to start with, right? Or even 8% of the world's cars? Or even 4% of the world's cars? Or whether it should have any cars at all? So what is the starting principle? The second kind of question which one has to ask is, we go and take poor people's land presuming development. Nonsense. Development has been the biggest lie since 1947. Everybody should know that and accept it, right? It's our biggest national lie, right? are there conditions under which we will not take people's land, no matter what? Are there no-go areas, whether in agriculture or in forests or in water bodies or in pastures or whatever? I mean, for instance, tomorrow, if under 7 Racecourse Road or under Rashtrapati Bhavan, you discover a big gold mine or a big oil field, will Mr. Modi move? At what price will he be willing to move? Okay. If you do the same thing with Mount Everest, right? You find an oil field under Everest, will you go and blow it up? Suppose you develop the geological and technological capability to do that, are you going to disturb Himalayan ecology for that? So there have to be no-go areas, period. There is no such thing as a civilized society without environmental regulation. And that's just a fact. That's just a survival necessity which Mr. Modi or Mr. Manmohan Singh or whoever the hell the Prime Minister is has to accept. Okay. So we need to discuss these principles. Right now we are in a situation where out of some 1,000 thermal power projects which have been given the go-ahead on paper around the world, over 400 are in India. That's the situation. Now, we know that the implementation is not going to be that high, but even if the implementation is 25%, 100 coal power plants, just look at Singrauli. And if you've been to Singrauli, not only are the forests gone, the animals gone, they've now got a Jurassic Park where they have stuffed animals to make children remember what used to be there. Okay? So do you want to convert all of India's rainforest into a Jurassic Park? Prakash Javadekar the other day said that it doesn't matter how many forests we take down, how many trees we take down, as long as we plant many more. Who is he? What does he know about forestry? Okay? I mean, anybody who's been to a genuine forest, genuine rainforest, knows you cannot replace this. Okay? No matter how many trees you plant. You know, monocultures and rainforests are two different things. Okay, man-made things cannot take the place of God-made things, period. So there have to be bottom lines, and they have to be very, very clearly spelled out. Look at regulatory capture. Now, regulatory capture is a term which makes sense in the West. It does not make sense in India, not only because regulations are never followed, but because the regulatory capacity of the monitoring establishment is dismal beyond description. So, for instance, for our book, Ashish and I had done some, secondary research, and Kanchi Kohli and Manju Menon have done the research on this. There are some 6 offices which carry out the monitoring of development projects around the country from the MOEF. These 6 offices have about 5 or 6 inspectors who do the job. So you're talking about 35 people monitoring how many projects annually? It used to be 6,000 when we did the first draft of the book about 5 years ago. And now it's about 9,000 projects. So 9,000 projects to be monitored by 30 well-appointed gentlemen. Impossible. And we know what happens. So environmental regulation has to be very, very tight. You cannot have this completely ridiculous belief which our elites, our educated, highly educated elites have today, which is that what has paralyzed policy in this country and has led to this stasis in the growth process is the fact that these projects are not getting clearance. That's not the reason. Think of this. You are getting to a situation where, because of rising inequalities, not just measured the way economists measure it, which is to say according to income classes, income groups, but also rural-urban inequalities, like Professor Haq was saying. Your data showed that the rural incomes are about 1/5 of urban incomes, right? And if you do that in some states, that number may be even higher. When those kinds of inequalities are present, and there is a massive migratory incentive for people to leave the countryside, and there is official pressure on people to leave the land, and there is huge psychological disincentivizing of agriculture, kheti mein ab paise nahi hai, etc. All these pressures put together mean what? Means that Mr. Modi wants to make 100 cities, right? Supposing he succeeds. Suppose you succeed with that plan. A generation from now, 20, 25 years from now, this is the scenario. You have moved 70, 80 or 90% of your population out of agriculture. India is the big miracle success story like China or South Korea, right? You've brought up a whole generation which does not know manual farming anymore, right? And you have mechanized, corporatized, second green revolutionized your agriculture, right? And what happens then? You need fossil fuels, you need more coal, more diesel, more oil, at a time when all those things are on the downward slope of the peak oil curve, right? And you have shrinking climate space. And you have 1.5 billion stomachs to feed. How are you going to feed them? My point is that you have a situation here which has to be thought through very, very carefully. You're reaching a cul-de-sac where you're creating exactly the wrong incentives for people at a micro level. If you succeed, that will be the worst failure. Look at the other effect of inequality. Right now, we have frontier communities around this country, whether it's in the Himalayas, or they're in the Andamans, or in the Western Ghats. When things go wrong, for instance, there's a cyclone, or there is an earthquake, or there is a major monsoon failure, there are people there who experience the pain and the suffering. So that creates a certain media voice, some presence. So you might think of the Jarawas and the Andamans, for instance, as your early warning control system. Okay, they are the people, after all, who survived the tsunami, not the Swedish tourists, even if they had PhDs, because they were sunbathing on the beach, and the Jarawas followed the elephants to the highlands, right? So these are your frontier communities who can signal when there is a problem, when there is a crisis. The tribals in Chhattisgarh or Jharkhand, they always say that long before the tiger goes, the bees have stopped pollinating. So the time to worry is then, not when the tiger goes, right? So if you remove these indigenous communities and they don't have a place, okay, who is going to tell our city dwellers in Gurgaon and Noida and Dubai's and Singapore's built within India that something is going seriously wrong? You don't have an early warning control system. So apart from reasons of social justice, we should have a public interest and a very, very selfish interest in the protection and survival of these frontier communities. If you think of our crafts, people, they don't just do agriculture in the villages, right? So there's some 800 different crafts which are there in the official classification of the Government of India. What if we propose, as massive civil society, public movement pressure, you define crafts as industry, and you start giving them the same kind of support you've been giving industry, which is to say skill upgradation, which is to say marketing support, which is to say small credit, most important, right? Now, if you go to Thailand, you go to Bangkok, there is a very famous market, those of you who've been there know about it, Chatuchak. So Chatuchak market is made from thousands and thousands of different craftsmen around Thailand. The government has a scheme called OTOP, one Tambon, one product. Tambon is a district. There are 600 districts in Thailand. Each one specializes in one product, which is state supported, and then that product is marketed at Chatuchak. आप अगर दिल्ली हाट गए तो वो दिल्ली हाट का वो माई बाप है. It's really a super place to visit. Massive. It has an annual turnover of $2 billion or something like that. Okay. A small country like Thailand can do that. India has many, many more crafts, huge talent, still there. One of the few parts of the industrializing world which still has so many crafts still alive, and it's been crushed and destroyed because of pure neglect, if not outright, aggression by the state. So that is one way to sort of get them into the MSME domain and get people out of agriculture. If you do want to get people out of agriculture, get them out of agriculture, but let them stay in the villages, because that is where they are happier, that is where they're most productive, that is their ecological role, and they will be a nuisance to us in the cities as we will be a nuisance to them. Okay. So, I think that is one major area in which very, very radical thinking has to be done on the relationship between town and country and how we restructure that. And this whole business of 100 smart cities, which is the most god-awful stupid idea I've heard, okay, if it succeeds, we are doomed. Okay, if the Delhi-Mumbai industrial corridor and the Chennai-Bangalore industrial corridor, if these projects succeed, we are ecologically doomed. That much I know. I mean, that much I have done my research to say that. Lastly, I think that, again, to quote Jawaharlal Nehru, agriculture cannot wait. Well, it has been waiting all these decades. And now, like Professor Haq was saying, you need to make that center stage. We are going to remain a farming society forever. Let's accept it. We are going to remain a farming world forever. Without small farmers and marginal farmers, you can't feed this world. All the resources that are going into mechanized agriculture are in short supply. Okay, they are based on non-renewables, short supply. Few decades, maybe 5 or 6, and then what?